So, all right, we're going to call our special meeting for the Murfreesboro City Council to discuss the budget. It is a little after 5. Craig, we'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Council, you'll recall that last week we provided an overview of our financial, the current status of what our projections are for this year and then projections are for the next couple of years. Today we want to, we also provided last week the information about supplemental requests we have to the budget for this year, for the next coming year, and some CIP to provide context for decisions with regard to the budget. So today what we'd like to do is update the information that we provided last week, give council a chance to discuss the supplementals that we provided. So any questions you might have, the department heads are here, and we can certainly dig into those to the extent that you would like to. We can talk about the CIP, what we anticipate. I'd remind you that we're not looking for decisions on CIP. The CIP information is given so that you can understand the full context as we go forward and talk about the budget and the decisions we have to make in the budget. And we can make those at a later time, but certainly if you have any questions now or any thoughts about the CIP, that we'd like to do that. What we'd also like to do is review the plan for what was previously referred to as outside agencies. What we'd like to refer to, if council's okay with that, is strategic partnerships as we go forward in funding some outside agencies to provide community services, and discuss a little bit about our plans on that. Ms. Jackson will take on that task, and if you have any questions about that, we can talk about that before those are decided on, either tonight, or we can do it at a later time for the actual funding of those.
Why don't we
just to review?
Why don't we go ahead, since we've got everyone here, and I know the outside agencies would love to spend the next 2 hours with us, but why don't we talk about have Ms. Jackson talk about strategic partnerships.
Absolutely.
And then that way the groups could be free to stay or free to go.
Thank you. One of the things that
Ms. Jackson, if you don't mind, is anyone else having trouble hearing? Can y'all make sure that microphone?
It's on.
Better?
That's better. Yeah.
Great. One of the things that I've had the privilege of reviewing is how we have traditionally approached our outside agency funding. I think I have learned more about a lot of really terrific agencies, some things that you know as well as I do. There are some amazing groups in this town that do really terrific work and accomplish a lot of things as a part of that. One of the things that we would like to look at as a part of this is to approach strategic partnerships with a 3-year transition proposal. In your packet in front of you, I believe it's in the bottom of the stack that you have, is some information looking at year 1, where we are now, to approach things by researching best practices for funding from other municipalities, something that we've looked at, looking to benchmark against how a lot of other cities approach similar issues and concerns and opportunities, to identify existing funding priorities based on recent funding decisions, and to define partnerships with organizations that have previously been funded as an outside agency, and then also to develop strategic partnership agreements with our recipients. So that's something we've been looking at doing. The strategic funding priorities identified, the strategic funding partners, and the strategic operating partners are listed in front of you, looking at agencies that have been funded in the past, and then also those that have requested as new applicants. Welcome any questions that you have, or I'd be happy to delve into any specifics that you would like. I'll gather if I can. I'd mentioned a 3-year process, kind of what year 2 and 3 look like. With year 2, it would be to really gather input from our stakeholders, the community, city staff, and then, of course, to bring that to council to refine strategic funding priorities. Based on that input, really look at all of our best practices more carefully, develop a grant application process in which goals and objectives are aligned to funding designations, and then to develop an assessment and reporting process to ensure that measurable goals and objectives are met. We would start with a transitional implementation, and then by that 3rd year, have a full implementation.
Ms. Jackson, you did a great job, fantastic job with this.
Thank you.
Really good job. What do you mean by, I know what this means, but I want to know what you mean,
Okay.
okay? By develop strategic partnership agreements with the recipients.
One of the things that that we look and do with most of the things that we approach, especially financial pieces, is to have something like a contract, a cooperative use agreement. One of the things that we experience in other areas are things where you have a recipient agreement, basically saying these are the things that we are committed to doing with these funds.
Okay. And I know the first one you said research best practices in other municipalities. And I'm not negative now, don't take it this way, but I think I know Murfreesboro is unique in its own way. You know, things that we need because people are moving here, and you know, we made the USA Today top 20 most enjoyable place to live. But and moving forward, I think we need to be really careful about always trying to fund as much as we can to these agencies, because a lot of them, they are run by volunteers. And it saves our city, and we have to provide these agencies, you know, for the people of Murfreesboro. There's a need. And if we ever go to maybe cutting a lot, we're going to probably be looking at millions or more dollars that has to come out of our budget, because these services, they must go on. You know, we must provide the services. So I just want us to always have that in the forefront as we look at the agencies, because all of you do a fabulous job in your agencies, fabulous jobs. So I just want us to always be aware, because sometimes when we look at other cities and what they are doing, we get kind of sidetracked on what we need to be doing. And it's good to know, because we can get new ideas, we can grow from that, but in the same hand, we have to have our own, you know, needs and meet the needs of our community.
Yes, ma'am.
So I feel like I've been rattling, but hope you understand what I'm saying.
Yes, ma'am.
Was the application process basically the same thing that it's been in the past, or how have we this year?
It was. As far as the questions that were asked on the application, a very similar timeline. The application itself included all of the same questions that have been asked in the past, and then a few extras. One of the things that you'll see added in the packet that was not asked before referred to agencies that have been funded in the past, asking how those funds were put. And then also there is a question about whether or not the agency was registered at givingmatters.org. You can see in that some are, some aren't. That is a place where you can see transparency of their budget, something that United Way requires. So any agency that receives funding from United Way is typically registered there. It's another part of that transparency of the process.
Well, I encourage you to continue to look at this kind of funding as how does it align with what we are trying to accomplish, the goals of our city, and aligning, finding, it's not necessarily redefining what they're doing as much as it is finding the slot that it fits within our organization and in what we do as strategic planning from a council standpoint. How does it fit and do what Madeline was saying, help us do a job that we've committed ourselves and our city to accomplish. outside the realm of our departments. But I love the way you're thinking. We've just got to chew on this bone a little bit and get it right. But I appreciate the work that you put into it, and that we everybody give a little patience as we move to make this more productive.
You bet. Thank you.
When you look at the budget numbers, the number seems like it's high, 1.69 million. But when you start looking at that on the things that we're legally obligated to give, 85% of that number, 1.4 million, either or library partnerships with Rutherford County or partnerships within the police department. So it's 15% is what really the overall. When we classify these as outside agencies, I don't know if I would classify the library system as an outside agency. And that's $1.1 million of the total number that we give out. That's more of it's.
You're exactly right. We have a different financial commitment to some of the agencies. In looking at the two different divisions that are placed in front, one strategic funding partners and the other strategic operating partners, look at how we can identify those. We have our government services gathered together. So rather than a simple alphabetical list of all the different agencies that are funded, looking at how those are grouped, how those are categorized, the obligations that we have to our partners in government, our community assistance, our arts and enhancement, ways where we can weigh each of those key areas. With our strategic operating partners, we look to group agencies that are working in cooperation with existing city departments, where we can say there are several agencies that have a strong relationship already with the police department, and they need to be a part of that feedback and a part of that partnership. Agencies that have relationships with the Parks and Recreation Department, with the Transportation Department, with development services, those that receive CDGB funds and are already going through extensive grant information as a part of that. How can we really address our administrative processes to be more efficient? Is all things that I think there are ways that we can do this to be more strategic.
Ms. Jackson, I just read this and it struck me a little bit here. Under the Jesse Beasley Foundation, it says reviewed through Rutherford County PAWS. What does it mean, reviewed through? There's another one up there for City Schools Foundation, but what?
When we were aligning the different groups, when you look at the government services portion of those strategic funding partnerships, and look at the government agencies are listed, then we were trying to align agencies basically back to that grouping piece. City Schools we have a strong funding relationship with City Schools, and then the City Schools Foundation is a part of that. We would consult with them. We would say review in partnership with that associated government entity. With Rutherford County PAWS, for example, that is our government partner for animal services. So we would like to ask for their review and help in that strategic partnership concept. I think part of that's the transition. Not looking to do anything other than communicate more, learn more, and look at not just our partners, but our partners' partners and how we are approaching our funding processes.
Okay, I guess there's a part of me that I think I understand at this point. I don't necessarily need to understand it fully right now, and we can talk a little bit offline, I guess. But the City Schools Foundation, I assume the idea is we're already giving the school system some number of dollars.
Correct,
and we're
yes.
coming over here in this other category and giving the school system in some way some number of dollars, and we're trying to make sure we do that's all going to the appropriate places. Jesse Beasley, completely separate from PAWS though, right?
It is, yes. It is a separate organization, yes.
They have a little bit of overlap as far as some of the services they provide, right? But they don't have anything to do with each other.
Correct.
And would we view that as, are we making a decision on to do one or the other, or?
No, sir. Looking at, when you see the actual funding recommendations, it followed the same pattern that you have seen in the past. Separate organization, separate carryover in those budget lines. Just basically looking for a way to have additional communication. Not either or.
All right.
Was the Meals on Wheels under Parks and Rec just because of its location? Or?
Yes, the geographical connection because of the agencies that you see listed under Parks and Recreation. All three of those agencies are located in the park system in some way. So we have a strong relationship based on the actual location.
Any other questions?
Brief comment. I can tell you, looking through these, it's kind of astonishing on some of them to see actually how little we do give in comparison to how many contributions they receive, which gives me some idea of how many people in Murfreesboro there are willing to support these agencies. And I think the hat goes off to the citizens of Murfreesboro for stepping up and going to the events and the things that these people put on, and I know they sponsor a lot of dinners and banquets and social events, and it's impressive to see some of the numbers of contributions to these places. We really do live in a wonderful city.
I agree, Mr. Smotherman, and I hope we can get to the point in our budget, in our funding coming in, that when they ask for a certain amount, one year maybe we can give them more than they asked for. I think that I would love to see us reach that point one day, be able to give them more than they asked for. Because like you said, looking at some of these agencies, I know they are being a little timid by just what they do. And I'm going to personally make it a task, or my personal task this year, to go out and try to visit some of these agencies that I have not visited. I see the name and I know what it means, but, you know, like the old saying, until you walk in my shoes, I'd like to go and just see how they operate.
Be terrific. I think part of that next year implementation in learning more and involving stakeholders and having meetings with the community agencies about what role they would request of the city, and of course the flip side of that as well being very important, so that we can come to you with good information and good recommendations based on strong partnerships with a lot of the agencies, some of whom are represented in this room, are also about more than funding. We have a lot of different shared mission, values, and priorities, and to be able to identify those and to be able to focus in on where city funding is appropriate and how is certainly a large task.
All right. If there are no other questions, Ms. Jackson, thank you.
Thank you.
Outside agencies, I want to tell y'all, say this every year, if it were not, and most of us have been able to see what you do, we appreciate what you do, because, you know, a lot of the relationships that you have, the government, we don't have those relationships. We can't go work with a homeless person like many of you do. We don't have the opportunity to be able to have those relationships, to be able to have the historic relationships you have with many different things in your organization. We want to be a part of that. But sometimes the best thing that we can do is get out of the way and let y'all do what you're good at. So this community is made stronger by what each of you do, and we appreciate the time, the effort, the volunteer hours that you put in, and what you continue to do to make Murfreesboro a good place to live. And with that, y'all are free to stay or free to go. You're welcome to stay and listen to all the exciting budget things we're going to talk about. As I say that, everybody can start getting up and leaving now. So
Not you guys.
that group, y'all can't go anywhere.
One thing I'll mention along those lines is you noticed that the chamber wasn't on there, and it usually falls under outside agencies. It is obviously a strategic partner for us, and we want to continue that, but we want to really think of that more under the economic development branch. So, when we talk about funding for that, we want to talk about that more along the lines of what they do for us for economic development, including tourism and other aspects. So that's why they were not included in this list. They are obviously still being funded, and we'll continue to fund them. Just think of them in a different light. Okay. Thank you, Angela. If we could take a minute and talk about calendaring. Want to accomplish as much as we can today, obviously. If we need to, meet next Thursday, again at 5 o'clock, depending on how far we can get today. We need to meet on May the 2nd at 5 o'clock. That's when we'll have Water Resources, Electric Department, and schools present their budget. And then what we would hopefully have by that time is a good direction from council on really building our budget so we can get it to you with a target date of May the 8th. That's a workshop on Wednesday for May. And if we can hit that deadline, that'll be great. It'll give us a little bit of flexibility. We need to present it to council by law by the 15th. So that'll give us a little week if we need to tweak a few things here or there. So that's scheduled unless anybody has any issues with that over the next couple of days. Or a couple of weeks, I should say. All right, so for today, as I said, I'm going to provide you with a little bit of update. You'll notice in your list you have a couple of charts on there. One of them reflects property tax revenues that we've received. I put that in there for a couple of, it's a graph. Let's see, I have a copy of it here. For a couple of reasons. One, that's a common question that we are asked is how we're doing on the sales tax. And this will give you a little view of it. Put it right. So it's viewable here. Local sales tax and the state sales tax revenues. But also, I think Councilmember Shacklet asked about dashboard information or information that we can show you in a kind of a dashboard fashion, and this would be a representation of that. You'll notice both, if you look at your charts, both our local sales tax and our state sales tax revenues, I'll have to move around this sheet a little bit, but are running below what we projected for last year, perhaps a little bit aggressive in our estimation of what we received right now. Well, obviously, April, May, and June are projections. We haven't gotten there yet, but we're projecting to be close to 2% below on our projections for sales tax, for local sales tax, and about 1.5 or 1.5% below on state sales tax revenues. And Aaron can jump in if I got that wrong in any respect, but that's, I think Aaron or Amanda have a pretty good handle on that, and they know those numbers pretty well. From an expense standpoint, you'll see that our expenses, updated budget pro forma that was included in your packet for this evening is a little bit higher than what we projected before. I think the bulk of that comes from being somewhat more conservative. Well, I guess it's just from an expense standpoint, somewhat more aggressive on what we anticipate our expenses to be. When we looked at that projection, we thought we might be a little bit low on that for next year. That's under other expenses on the pro forma statement that you see there and up on the screen. And so we've adjusted that amount, which obviously raised what the net result of it would be to, hang on, let me put this into the right order. So that you'll see the
You want to look on it with me?
the net number is about 16.3. Now, that does include the supplemental requests that we have yet to talk about. We certainly want council to talk about that today, and it includes our CIP debt service. But what we've identified in working with the numbers, and what's quite clear, is that on the expense side, having cut last year and looking at what we need for this year, which is represented by the supplemental requests that are before you, it's not an expense side that we're dealing with. Really, what we're dealing with is a structural issue on our revenue side. We haven't raised property taxes for 20 years, and I think there's lots of reasons why we've been able to get by without doing that. Lots of positive reasons why, but we've kind of come to the end of that era, and so we can talk about that in a little bit if council would like, but that's pretty much where we're at. Before we do that, before we get there, though, do we have any discussions on supplementals? Like I said, the department heads are here, and we can answer any questions that you have on that list. They are prioritized on your list, 1, 2, and 3. Ones are ones that either fulfill a commitment that we've made contractually or in an agreement with, for example, the county on locating our call handling for emergency medical services and jointly in our police building, so we do need to beef up some support staff on that, or for some other projects that we're having and or other things that are immediately needed. If we do have enough adjustment on our revenue side, we can get down to what we would refer to as priority 2. Still very important items that would, from an operational standpoint, allow us to continue to provide services at a high level for our citizens. And 3 is highly dependent upon what council's decisions are as to whether we fund down to that level. I think you all were provided this earlier, and you'll see 10s on there. 10s are ones that were submitted and requested that we made a decision administratively that we would not fund for this year, either because they're not needed or we would do it in the years to come.
Mr. Tyndall, I have a couple of questions
Yes, ma'am.
on the supplement. On the economic development, shouldn't the chamber, it's 150,000, shouldn't the Chamber of Commerce be doing that?
Chamber of Commerce does do a very important function on economic development there. They have responsibility for the entire county, so they're somewhat diffused in what they need to pay attention to. Obviously, they pay a lot of attention to us, and we feel like they do a very good job, but we do need to supplement what they do that's specific in particular to what we need in Murfreesboro. And so we are developing right now with a consultant that we hired last year. Not last year, we hired him actually this year, a few months ago. Time flies. To develop a plan for that's specific to Murfreesboro and economic development and marketing ourselves. And so obviously there's some costs involved in that. And we do want to build in-house our economic development. Mr. Whitaker is working very hard in that area, but we need some outside resources, and it's quite common to have outside resources with consultants who are very ingrained into the, for example, the corporate relocation community and all that they do and the discussions and who they know. So it is an important feature for us to do specific to ourselves.
Okay. And we have, it's number 1 and number 2. For instance, background screening, HR 15,000, and we have $92,650 for assist departments in recruiting, internal investigations and reporting.
Right.
Isn't that something that the police can do? When you're looking at background screening and all, don't they already have the equipment
No.
to do that?
That really is not a law enforcement function. We wouldn't ask the police to do that. That's an HR function. It's quite common in most organizations. As a matter of fact, it would be imprudent for organizations not to do careful background checks in most cases, and we need to beef up our work in that area to assure that we run the background checks on the civil side, not the law enforcement side, to find out information that we need to do. And really, that's a number that's, and Pam can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that's a number, it's an estimate based on who we hire and how many we hire, because it's on a per person basis, right? Yeah, so, yeah, that would be about 300 people, background checks on about 300 people. And so we'd have full and part-time people running through for a background check.
Okay, I'm getting on my pet peeve now. Saturday service for Rover, $57,075. That's the number 3 as far as priority.
That's
Why would, this is just,
right.
I don't agree with, why would that be a number 3 and tree replacement a number 1 over Rover?
Well, tree replacement became number 1 because it would be funded through. We have to budget for it. We have to provide it in here. It's actually funded through a tree fund. What do we call it?
Tree bank.
Tree bank. There you go. Tree bank. So it'll be funded through the tree bank. So it got a 1 because it had another funding source, and it actually, frankly, was a 3, but it went.
The tree bank works where, say, a development can't put in the proper amount of landscaping, so they give money to a tree bank,
Right.
and then the city goes and plants trees in different areas. So it's really,
It's really more forfeitures.
Yeah.
Where they haven't done what they're supposed to.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
we get
so-
the money to plant for them somewhere in the city.
So that prioritization is a little bit unusual because it came in and we had another source for it. But Rover was brought up last Wednesday, and so we added that in there. That's the city's portion of it after federal and state funding. So obviously it's a lot more than that to provide the service. That's just our portion of it, which is about 20%, 25%?
About 25 is what we budgeted.
About 25%. So it's 75% more than that. That cost.
I know we were looking at the finances, and I don't know the numbers of people, the numbers yet, showing how many people use Rover, how many tickets we sell.
Mm-hmm.
But I still would like to see, if nothing else, a pilot program on Saturday for Rover services, and I would like to see us move that from a number 3 up to a number 1. I mean, that's just my opinion. Move that from a 3 to a 1. And I know we talked about the last meeting that the people, they can use Uber and Lyft, which is very popular. I agree with that. But we're talking about a segment of our community who cannot afford Lyft and Rover. And these people are going to work, need to go to the doctor, the grocery store. And if we're the type of vibrant city that we say we are and we care for our people, I would like to see us move this up. I don't know. I'd like other opinions.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we might as well get some of this out on the table. We're $16 million the opposite way of where we're supposed to be. I mean, adding new stuff, we're going to have to make a decision whether or not we're going to go from $172 million to $188 million in 1 year, a 9.36% increase. That includes Rover on Saturdays. Mm-hmm. So there's no sense in changing it from a Tier 3 to a Tier 1 if this council votes to just do everything on the list. Because it don't matter if it's Tier 1 or Tier 2 or Tier 3, everything on the list gets done. Now, if we start cutting out tiers or whatever, then that's where we have to decide whether or not is it more important to have new police officers or is it more important to have Saturday Rover? I mean, I think it's a no-brainer to me the other way. As much as I'd like to do a lot of things, the numbers don't add up, and we'll have to, as part of this going to come into the discussion of tax rates and all that stuff too, but I mean, I'm not sure I don't know what I'm not even real sure I understand the appropriate, like chronology for how to discuss these things, Why discuss Rover on Saturdays if everybody approves everything on the list?
Right.
Well, I mean, I know we need, but if we don't, then we need to discuss it. But when are we going to discuss the big picture stuff of whether or not we're going to do everything on the list? Or do we have to do this all one at a time? I guess is what my point is. Are we going to get through what you want to present and then we need to talk about that stuff, or what?
I respect that. I respect
I just don't know the chronology. I mean, I don't know the...
I just know that we say we are customer service caring community, and we have a huge need, in my opinion, for this service. And I think we need to make it a priority. This is just my opinion, because these people who are using these services, they are just as much as part of our community and they are paying taxes. So I understand what you're saying, but this is just dear to my heart, and I'm going to keep saying it, and I'm going to respect what the council wants, but I'm still saying that it's a big need in our community. And the almost 9 years I've been on this council, we found money for everything else we need.
Well, I think I understand what you're saying, and we can certainly talk about that. I think you have a broader point, Councilman Lance, on the order of how we handle this, and I think you raise a good point. I mean, obviously, we could talk about how to adjust revenues and then go back and talk about CIP and budget supplementals. That's up to the council, and council's, we're prepared to talk either way. So that's fine with me. I think your point's probably driven as to, are we getting too granular before we get to the bigger points?
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm trying to.
And we could certainly discuss it either way. It's council's preference on how we would want to do that.
I mean, do you have a big picture is this part of a big picture presentation and that comes to an end and then we want to dive into some things, or do you want to jump on in whenever?
I can get to a recommendation, make a recommendation, and we can plug in here and we can show what it looks like. We can certainly do that, and then maybe that preempts some of the discussion, but what we don't want to do, I don't want to remove the opportunity for council to discuss expenses at a particular level if they desire to do that, or if there's new things on there that they want to discuss. But as I said, it's completely up to council on how you want to tackle this issue.
One last question I have. The part-time wages, $367,000.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
Part-time and overtime. A lot of that, some of that is overtime for emergency services that we need to anticipate and probably under-budgeted for last year. Some of that is to make up the cuts made in Parks and Recreation. Their part-time staff does a lot of work for them and does a very good job with them, but they can only work so many hours per week. They can't work more than 29 hours a week. So you have to have enough of them to make sure that they can do the entire job and schedule them. And Nate's done a fantastic job in working very close as he can to the edge based on the cuts from last year. But we can't keep going that route without running into some issues. If we go over 29 hours on any individual, we have to offer them benefits. We have to offer them insurance and vacation and other benefits. So we have to be health care benefits. So we have to be very careful of that. Oh, Nate's here. Nate, do you have anything to add? Okay.
Is there a list? Is there a CIP list? Like just
from last.
This CIP, is there just a list of the projects that are included in here in each of these individual pages?
The information was provided you last year. You got CIP for 2020, and you got the 5-year CIP. So it should be in your booklet from last week.
This booklet.
Yeah.
So it's all the same.
That hasn't changed.
Okay.
All right.
That just has the projects listed, like each individual sheet.
That's the one. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Yeah.
Mr. Tindall, what's the rationale on the contingency, the 1.3 on the new expense side? Is there something specific in your mind associated with that?
There isn't. In the past, we budgeted an amount of contingency that we called unforeseen expenses. We stopped doing that just last year as part of our efforts to balance as close as we could on our budget. From a budgeting standpoint, it's probably prudent to budget something as unforeseen, because more than likely we will have circumstances that will cause us to dip into those funds. So that's what it represents. It's nothing specific. Good luck.
It'd be nice if we looked at the revenue before we got too detailed on what we're going to supplement.
Let's talk about the revenue piece. One thing I'm looking at here, let me finish this. 275. I mean, you basically have got it broken down. I just try to break it down per department. And out of the 3.9 million, 2.426 is public safety. So 2.5 million. I may have done that all for naught. You may have that broken down somewhere else, Craig. But police and fire are somewhere in the 2.5 million range.
Right. And
then the next largest one is going to be parks at roughly 825,000.
Mm-hmm.
IT's at 330,000. HR 112. Legal, we've got about 250. So we're hiring one attorney and or two staff attorneys. Does that sound right?
Let me find it on here. I think it was.
Should be one
Adam, was it one? I thought it was one attorney.
Just one attorney.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Oh, I'm sorry. That was a tier 10. So
Right. That's not.
I had presented alternatives.
We took the least expensive.
tier 10, Adam. You see where you fall on this.
Yeah.
Never mind, because I added up some of the tier 10s. But what you're recommending is really funding tier 1, 2, and some of the tier 3s. Is that what we're?
Right. Tier 1, 2, and depending on council's decision, tier 3. Certainly, what we feel like we would really need would be the tier 1s. If we could get in the tier 2s, that would certainly be very helpful. Tier 3s would depend on council's decision on revenue enhancement.
1 and 2 is about 3 million, is that?
As you see across the top, it shows you ones are about 2 million, twos are about 1 million, threes are about 860.
Mr. Tindall, the emergency coordinator in the police department, are those related to other discussions we've had related to transport and things like that, or are they just separate from, so I'm on line 28, 29, 30, 31?
Right. I think those are really going back to our dispatch center and what we're doing in there, working with the county on co-locating, and what we want to do is to make sure that center is ready to handle increased traffic coming in there. And that really has a huge benefit to emergency medical services throughout the city and certainly in the county.
Well, I mean, it doesn't take an accountant to look at where we are from a revenue side. So, I mean, do y'all want to discuss that, or you want to hear what Mr. Tindall's recommendations are from that point? I don't know if it really helps us to get into
Right.
cutting out, Rover bus service at 51,000 when we're talking about, 14 or 15 million. So I think it may be better to talk about the revenue portion first.
Sure. And to piggyback on what you just said, graphically show really what we're talking about. So you'll see on the screen now the graph that shows a chart of our fund balance, and the red box would represent, to make it a little bit bigger, our red box represents where we really need to be in accordance with policy, and the darker blue is where we would be in accordance with policy based on the fact that we have a rapidly growing population. We want to be towards the upper end of that. That's our projection right now, and I think you're right. And I think Councilmember Mayor and Councilmember Lance had a sense of that. If for example, we were to really take out tier 3 and tier 2 and tier 1, we can see that the line really it moves, but it doesn't create our it doesn't solve our issue and keep us where we should be. We'll put those back in. On a revenue standpoint, what we've done is we've shown in our projections the major revenue sources: local taxes, state shared, and property taxes, and we have a lot of other revenues that come in smaller segments. We have some one-time revenue. We wanted to separate those out because we don't want to count on that year over year. Generally, those are land sales. Once you sell a piece of land, you can't resell it. You shouldn't. It's not a good idea. And so we don't want to rely on that year after year. Our biggest portion of our revenue is obviously taxes, and those are generally sales taxes that we get. That represents quite a bit. That's variable and what economists would call relatively elastic when you get to an economic condition that is a downturn. Your sales tax are going to change quite a bit. Relying a lot on sales tax puts you in the position of having to make adjustments very quickly, because that shows up very quickly when the economic conditions change. Property taxes are much more stable. They don't change quite as bit. They lag quite a bit behind economic conditions, and so they provide a lot more stability. So when you think about things, running long-term projects and large things such as schools, or maintaining things like debt service over long periods of time, what you want to look at is your property tax revenues and where that's coming in. Right now, we have property tax revenue that's quite a bit less than our sales tax revenue. This puts us a little bit at risk for some variability in there if the economics were to change in the country. We can't do anything with sales tax revenues. We have our rate set where it should be set, or where it can be set, I should say, by state law, so we can't do much on that. What we have to take a look at really then, from a structural standpoint, what's left is property tax revenue and our property tax rate. We haven't done a property tax rate increase since 1999. 1998 is when we did it. 1999, I believe, is when it went into effect. At that point in time, the rate was 1.9 on $100 valuation assessment. So we had a 1.9 rate then. We have now a 0.95, so we're less than 50% of what we were. On a real dollar value, we're about 75% on our tax rate where we were in 1999. We do what's called equalization, so every 4 years, when we get the assessment from the tax assessors, we'll equalize our rate so that we don't have windfall in income. So we'll equalize it based on the value of the property, and it will drop down. A lot of places then make adjustments to make sure that your revenues aren't becoming an issue. We haven't done that for five equalization periods or 20 years. So right now our rate's at 0.995% per $100 of valuation. If I were to make a recommendation, I would make a recommendation to council to take a very hard look at our property tax rate and where we're at. As I said, we've we've had the benefit over a long period of time, over those 20 years, of doing some projects that have really added to the revenues of the city. We've built the Gateway and the Avenue, and it's a big tax generator. It's now leveling off. It's maturing. We've built out there, and the Avenues is built out as much as it's going to build out. We have actively looking for new types of projects along those lines, but right now our sales tax revenues have somewhat leveled over a period of time. The Internet's taken effect on tax revenues since 1999. And between 1999, the Internet sales have really taken an effect on sales tax revenues in cities. And you'll see that particularly on Christmas sales. When February, you'd see Christmas sales would be very large, and now they're not nearly as large as they were in the past on a percentage basis over the years. So, but we had that benefit during those 20 years to be able to work on our budget in that respect. We also had the benefit of land sales because council was very wise and made decisions on investment of land out in the Gateway area. And so we had the benefit of land sales out there. We don't have much more land out there. We have a couple of sites that we're going to work on diligently to try and sell and turn into economic development projects, but we don't have that type of revenue coming in anymore. So we need to go back and take a look at really where we should be from a property tax standpoint on our revenues if we want to continue to provide the level of services that we do. So if you have any questions about that history, I'm happy to answer those. I'll add from an economic standpoint that our major costs that we incur as a city has gone up since 1999 substantially, and you have some of those facts and figures in in the packet that's before you. As a service provider, we hire people. We have over 1,000 employees right now. I don't know what we had in 1999. I'm sure it was quite a few less than that. And we've hit a market right now, an employment market that is very competitive. So in order to get good employees and to maintain and to retain them, we have to be in that market. We have to provide wages that make sense to our employees. That's a substantial. You look at our expense line. The most substantial is salary and benefits, and unless we provide that, we don't have the people that we need to have to provide the customer service that our citizens expect. So that's gone up. Construction costs have gone up enormously in Middle Tennessee, but across the country since 1999. Again, those figures are in there. It's raised a substantial amount. And as a city, as a municipality, we build a lot of things, and we use a lot of construction services and materials. And when that cost goes up substantially, we face a lot of pressure from a cost standpoint. So since 1999, our costs have gone up. We've had the good fortune to have some sales tax revenues that have been relatively stable, but those are balancing out. And so at this point in time, we need to turn and look at the revenue source that really provides a degree of stability and that we haven't addressed for more than 20 years, and that's property tax.
Craig, I don't know if the data is available, but as we've been looking at this and kind of working through this, one of the things that occurred to me when I was looking back at the tax rate and the fact that they've not been adjusted because of the equalization, as our households have grown over time and as those properties have been reassessed, I guess we have 48,000 rooftops paying, is that right? What's the number or the count on the rooftops?
It's probably
Residential.
a little high. For
Okay.
rooftops.
But if we would go back and look at what we had in 1999, the rooftops we had, and the effective rate of the index that was being paid, and how properties or how rooftops have grown over that period of time, and then as the index has been adjusted down, that gap in revenue loss because it was not raised or adjusted.
Right.
I did some rough math on that, and that's probably a pretty big number, and I couldn't do it perfectly because I didn't have the data. But have you looked at that at all? Just the opportunity cost of the lost revenue to the city?
Not in that fashion. We more in an aggregated fashion on the entire aggregate of our property valuation. So residences and businesses are mixed in there.
Right.
But I've looked at that number and how it's grown over the time and how we've adjusted downward each equalization period, and substantially, every 4 years, it's a substantial drop because the value of the property's gone up or we have new properties coming in. So it has been a substantial drop over many years. So somewhat in the same fashion, not concentrating on rooftops as much as I am on the property number as a whole.
Something I got recently from the assessor's office, we probably have about 38,000 residential properties right now.
Okay.
So you see if we look at this, just this here chart, that's good English, but if we look at 1999, 2002, and then from 2019 to 2022, the effective rate of you can't really see that, has dropped in every 4 years. We took a 18% drop in 2007 and a 21% drop in 2019. Those are equalization periods.
Just kind of a general comment too, as we're talking through this. I know this is probably the first of many discussions we will have, but obviously the residential rooftops are assessed at 25%, commercial are assessed at 40%.
Right.
So whatever rate we put in place, the commercial properties will be paying more because they're assessed at a higher rate. I know we've talked a lot about the solid waste fee. Had a lot of discussion about that. I do think, as a residential property owner, we want to make sure we kind of separate those issues from the standpoint of what the solid waste is and the cost to the city, because that's part of the number that we're dealing with.
Right.
And we have a plan, I think, to move to a utility type solution for that. But if we just do property taxes, then that's probably a little more punitive on the commercial side without adjusting the solid waste fee. And I know they're two different discussions, but because they're already paying at a higher rate and we're not recovering fully for the residential solid waste piece because commercial's paying on their own. So it's a little heavier. Whatever we do is going to be heavier on the commercial side than it's going to be on the residential side. So I personally, I think you're looking at the problem correctly just from my perspective. But I do think, in my mind, it would cause me to speed up the solid waste recovery piece of that, and maybe balance whatever we have to do on a property tax standpoint, just because of who it impacts on the commercial side. Just my 2 cents. So I think you're going to need both, but just my 2 cents.
What are the? I mean, all this stuff is new to me and probably new to a lot of folks up here. But I'm just curious: are there, with the other side of this, there's the tax rate. That's one of the variables of this. There's also the 25%, the 40%. What are the choices as far as what you can and can't change or do, or is all we can do is this or is this board or whatever you want to call it? Is all we can do change the tax rate, or could we change the 40% to 38 or the 25% to 28?
Yeah, no, on property tax, I think it's set by state law for the assessment and how much property is assessed between residential and commercial. I think we can change the rate on property. From a sales tax standpoint, we're maxed out as far as that's concerned on our limit on what we can set for local option sales tax. So really, it's the property tax that we can change.
And it's just the rate, though, is all we really have the authority to change. There's nothing really in the mix and what we count as commercial versus what we count as residential or any of those types of things.
Yeah,
we don't really. That's not our deal.
That's defined by statute.
Okay.
Now, fees are another issue, and I think that's what Councilmember Martin was talking about, is how do we work between fees, and we have a model that allows us to input some numbers and see how that works. But
speaking of fees, where are we in the impact fee study?
We've just started the impact fee. I think Gary met with our consultant last week, and he's going to start. It's a several-month process. He needs to gather a lot of information and do analysis before he can come out with a recommendation on what it would be. So it would probably be sometime during the next budget year where we'd have recommendations that we could bring to council and discuss. And it would probably, from an implementation standpoint, as a practical matter, would probably be the following budget year if council decides to do that.
Any way we can expedite that? I mean,
Expedite it for this, to do it and
Not
look at it this
necessarily.
budget year, that would.
not necessarily that. I just mean expedite it. I mean, so that answer doesn't really satisfy me that we're talking something that's 3 budget cycles away.
Well, this, in the next budget cycle, so it'd be, implemented in 2 years. Not next year, but the year after, fiscal year after that, for implementation.
Or
but
fiscal year 22?
Be fiscal year 21.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant 22.
Yeah, so it would be, what we'd want to do is have the information presented to council so we can factor it into the 21 budget. So June of 21, we'd implement or not development impact fees.
And I don't believe we can use those for operating, right? Impact fees? Are they
We
just for capital items?
But I think we could use that, for example, for all these road projects that are on here, I mean,
Right.
which would reduce our debt service, which comes back to operating, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it still would have an impact.
Right. And it'd be limited to what we try. So if we do a road impact fee, we'd only offset capital expenses on roads. But can we do paving management on a pay-as-you-go? I think we could probably do that. So it's not solely debt. I think we can, as long as we're using it for roadways and roadway development, then I think we're okay in that respect.
Well, I know Murfreesboro's not unique, but the cost of living's high and it's going up. And it doesn't matter if it's in your household or if it's in your city when we're looking at this budget here. I was doing some research last night, and I may have went back too far. I was looking at tax rates and how they had accumulated over the years. In 1880, our tax rate in Murfreesboro was 30 cents on 100, which to me seemed like a lot of money for that time period. Of course, they were buying covered wagons. They weren't buying $40,000 and $50,000 police cars and fire equipment. We had 111 schools in Murfreesboro, and the average school had less than 30 students, but it wasn't publicly subsidized. So we're looking at several things today that are just the cost of the quality of life that we live in Murfreesboro. And there's a reason people are coming here. It's because we are still an affordable city, and the places they're coming from are worse than what we are. I mean, there's no question about it. They wouldn't come here to downgrade. So I think most people that are coming to our community understand that the things they want come with an expense. And I talk to some people and they say, why are you wasting all that money on the soccer fields? I don't play soccer. I talk to some people who say, why are you wasting all that money on the tennis facility? I don't play tennis. And usually I'll interrupt them at about that point because I know what their hobby is, and I'll say, well, what about the golf course? Oh, now that's good. We need to fund that. So it's always interesting to see people's perspective of what they want to pay for. But at the end of the day, we're all in this together. And ultimately, we need to come up with what we think the rate needs to be in order to fund the services that people expect our city to provide. And all these things that are on this list, whether they're Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3, are all important. The conservative in me says, just start cutting. Stop spending. If you're in a hole, stop digging. But the reality is the other option is we have to look at other sources of revenue. We live in the world of the internet now. Brick and mortar stores are struggling. The market is going to see a slowdown in the next couple of years. I think it's everybody I talk to that studies economics says that in the next couple of years, we're going to see a slowdown. What that means to us is that we're going to see a reduction in the amount of sales tax revenue that we're generating. The only safeguard that we have of providing services to this city at the rate that they are used to, without starting cutting services and starting laying people off and everything, is to make the budget functional. And that's our goal tonight. And I think the more time we spend on trying to figure out what that number is to provide the services that people expect, the better off we'll be.
You know, when you look at this budget, I want to go on what I think we probably, it's easy to armchair quarterback to say what we should have done, but you look at the population growth and then you look at the people who've come in, and, you know, I consistently hear sort of what Councilman Smotherman was saying, well, you know, you shouldn't have a tennis facility, or you shouldn't have a soccer park, or you shouldn't have all these parks. And I mean, you know, the same people who are saying that may be in the real estate industry and are reaping the rewards for roads that have been built and soccer parks that have been built, that all these people are coming and expecting a greenway. And so, I mean, yeah, we could build a city. I'm from Mont Eagle. Mont Eagle's a great city, but there's very little parks. There's no greenway. There is now. They've even built the Mountain Goat Trail. But, you know, there are these things that, as a city that's our size, that's expected. And, you know, I've sat on this council for a long time, and to some extent we've used not raising the property tax as a badge of honor, that, you know, we go around saying, you know, we've not done this. And, you know, what business has kept their price the same over a 21-year period and is still in business? Because look at gas just this week. You know, gas is close to $3 a gallon now, and we can't build a road for the same that we built a road in 1998. Even with that, the property that we try to buy for right-of-way is nowhere near close to what we were paying for right-of-way in 1998. And, you know, I'll say that I'm one of the ones that have said, look, you know, we haven't raised taxes in Murfreesboro in 20 years. There's no one sitting on this council who's voted for a property tax increase. None of us have. And so we don't want to do that. But at the same time, you know, we built a school 4 years ago that cost $24 million. We're building the same school this year that cost $31 million, not including land. We're going to be close to $40 million in a school that we built 5 years later. It's costing more for police cars. We've upped our police salaries and our fire salaries to be more competitive with the market. And yeah, we could not do that. But, you know, I think in the long term, the residents expect a safe city to live in. When they call 911, that somebody answers in a police car or fire trucks there. So, you know, I'm not advocating saying that this is a big government issue. People will confuse the local government and the federal government. We provide services, and it's really easy. I mean, we're not trying to grow the size of our government. As our population grows, we have to hire people to pick up trash. We have to hire people to police streets, and that costs money. And the way that we've been able to do what we're doing right now is because we've been able to have property and sales tax growth with people moving in, and honestly, new commercial buildings that have been put on the tax rolls at 40%. That's what really has subsidized us to this point. I think we made a mistake. This is where I'm going with this. When we had the equalization, or we had the reassessment 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago? Last year. You know, we went from $1.20, we decreased our tax rate by 21%. I think is what the number that we decreased our tax rate, where most people, on average, it was 10%. I think that the appraisal values went up some. As talking with Councilman Lance, the property values went up 25%. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that every one of us sitting in this room, that we are the ones that caused everyone's property values to go up. I do think that we're a big part of that, building schools and building roads and those, making sure that having police headquarters and those things that keep the community safe. So, you know, in essence, property values went up, you know, at least 10%. and we lowered the tax rate, which is, I mean, that's commendable that we did that. But I think what we're going to have to look at 4 years from now or 3 years from now, other council members who are sitting here, they're going to have to really look at that when that rate goes, the assessed value goes up, that means that everyone's property is worth more. And the answer is not just to lower the tax rate. Now, if we can lower the tax rate and provide the same services that we've provided, then I say we do it. But if we lower the tax rate and the services degrade, then we're not going to have to worry about property value appreciation because no one's going to want to move here to buy property. So I'm not saying that that's a Band-Aid to fix all this, but we made the decision 2 years ago to not rely on fund balance, and I think that's not saying that's part of this. That $14 million, we could maybe survive 1 or 2 years with keeping our levels 1 year. So, I would say if there's any other suggestions out there, this is not, I don't think, an indictment on the council's not done the right thing. Debt is not even a huge portion. You look at our debt at $36 million in debt service. Even if it goes up to 41 with a new school, I'm not saying $4 or $5 million is not a lot of money, but in the scheme of a $175 million budget, there's one place where you can get it. So I don't have I think our mistake is not. Now it looks as a property tax increase. Our mistake should have been 2 years ago. We should have looked when the reassessment came in, and not necessarily saying that it was a property tax increase. It was a valuation increase, and that's really what councils are going to have to do every reassessment moving forward, in my opinion.
I don't disagree. I think, and I mentioned it earlier in another meeting, that property tax, all of our tax rates should be looked at every single year as part of our budget, and we should not consider where we're at. So, to the extent that we could, in the future, perhaps adjust our tax rate appropriately because we have other sources of revenue or something along those lines. If we do this every year, if we look at it every year, certainly every 4 years is where you have to take a real deep consideration. That's probably the most prudent thing to do. So I would agree exactly with what you said, Mayor.
What? I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, you're fine. I mean, we can go into the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, but what I would make the recommendation for the council is, why don't we talk about what we're willing or want to look at from a tax rate standpoint, and then let staff come back and tell us what that will, what you would be able to fund and wouldn't be able to fund. I mean, would that be acceptable to you?
Absolutely.
So really, we need. Go ahead.
Well, if you look at if you go back to that page where we just were, I mean, basically you've got a revenue number that's $166 million. Of that, property taxes is about 42.2 million. Next year we expect that to be 43. So I mean, a 9.5 cent increase would reflect about a 10% increase in the rate, correct? Going from
Right.
94 to 105 or to 104 would be about a 10% increase, which means we would get for every 10 cents we increase the tax rate, it should mean about $4 million of extra revenue, right?
Well, we can put it.
Should be about right. Yeah.
Yes. Is that too simple?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's showing 90, yeah.
I mean, 42 million.
10%.
That's 30%.
4.2 million, right?
Holy smokes.
Did I simplify it too much? I'm trying to get this in terms of how we can think about this from a higher level here to try to make some decisions.
So if we did a 0.01 increase, we would correct it to about 2.2 million, 2.3 million
What?
from the 16. So, yeah, that's a 0.09% increase, or 0.9 increase in the tax rate, 10%
Yes.
increase.
Gets how much more? Dollars?
Well, we were where were we at before? We were at, no, I mean we were at 16.3, and now if we put that in there, we're at 12.3. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
4 million.
All right. So for every 10 cents, for every 10 cents, we're talking $4 million of extra revenue, right?
Right.
Ish. Close enough for us to try to think through this and make some decisions, some big picture decisions before we get granular.
So to satisfy the 16 million.
So 30 cents gets you close to being revenue neutral.
With everything included.
So does the 16 million, what does that fund through the levels that we're talking about, tiers? Is that just through tier 1 or
That would have all three in there,
all three tiers?
All three are-
16 million.
are showing the 16 point.
So generally,
16.3
we're
million,
talking,
yep.
you have 45 cents, so we're talking 40 cents generally for the 16 million?
Reassessment
Right.
in 3 years.
I would tell you that 0.45 would put that line, it would repair what we've taken out of the fund balance and put the line. As you can see here, it would
Right.
put us right about the top of the policies as we go across.
And about how much of a cushion are we looking at? Well, you don't have to,
For the contingency?
That would put about 4 million
okay.
in a
What I was getting at,
fund balance.
this is painful, we know it's painful, but while we're giving the shot, we need to give all the medicine, I think. So, raising taxes, I think we need to raise it to where next year we're not gonna say, okay, we're raising it again, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
So, maybe 2 years of cushion, is what I kind of like to see, you know, so we won't come back next year. And you'll be surprised, the number of people out in Murfreesboro who are already saying, hey, y'all, we know you're going to increase the taxes. A lot of people,
I don't know if that's-
they pretty much know that we have to do that in order to maintain. 'Cause I see when you put that figure in, I see how it went over a little bit, yeah.
Trying to get it all to show up at once. And so you can see down at the bottom of the fund balance, whether it's positive or negative in FY '20 and '21 for 2 years, depending on what tax rate we put in here. Of course, we can adjust the fees as well, but that's that would be what you would refer to, I think, as a cushion.
Mm-hmm.
At 0.45, it'd be about 4 million back into the fund balance to replenish what we had used in the past, to get our fund balance back within policy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Average home in Murfreesboro is,
$233,079.
what's the impact on the 45% increase in property tax?
The difference would be on a monthly basis, $19.23. It shows on the chart there. The annual difference is about $230, $231.
Yeah, I did my tax increase, and it looks like about $250. Ouch. Yeah.
So on a commercial property, increase would be about $1,500. On the average commercial, about $850,000.
Do you have any kind of information on what kind of economic impact a 50% increase on property taxes would have in a city like ours?
Don't have that information. I think a lot of that would be driven by where your tax rate starts from. So, if you have an exceedingly low tax rate, a percentage increase is going to have different than if you're already at a pretty high tax rate.
And there'd be some argument that that's $23 million that's not going to get spent, or $22 million is not going to get spent at businesses and create sales tax and create jobs. in our community over the next year because they're having to pay it on taxes. Is that,
Well, economically speaking, I mean, the money has to go somewhere and be used for something. So yeah, you're right. It would be transferring it into the cities, and then I guess the response to that would be, are we providing the value for that dollar that would increase sales? Are we adding to the community? Are we adding roadways and having more people come in, whether they move here or travel here from outlying areas to shop? So you'd have to measure the entire economic benefit and reduction that all that might entail. I think from a standpoint of comparability and who we really are competing with from the state, we've charted out a few of the cities and the tax rates that are relatively close to us. I mean, we drop off pretty quickly in some of the populations after Murfreesboro, so some of the cities are relatively smaller, which you'll look, and if you look across the nation, the larger the city, the higher tax rate, because providing to larger cities and providing the amenities is just more expensive, and that's just a fact. So you'll always see a larger city probably have a higher property tax than otherwise. And if this is with the I typed in 45 cents. I can change that number and put anything you in, but with a 45-cent increase, it puts us at about 1.4 using our population that's 2017 U.S. Census population. But you can see where we are. If you add to that how fast we've grown in the last couple of years from 2017, we're probably above 140. So we are. While Clarksville shows 153, we're certainly probably getting pretty close to that, if not a bit higher after the next U.S. Census in 2020. But we are getting closer to Knoxville and Chattanooga every day, quicker and quicker. And you can see where their tax rates lie. The other thing in the last column you'll see is whether or not it's comparing apples to apples. We provide schools. City schools, and our city schools right now are 30% of our tax rate. These other cities that are in there don't have city schools. They are provided by the county. And so to put in a comparable tax rate for those cities so you can measure against what we're doing right now with city schools, you can see that we fall well within our comparables to stay pretty competitive from a business standpoint for property tax.
Do you remember what our special census numbers came out at? Was it 125,000?
122.
122?
Yeah.
But that Smyrna and Laverne, when you look at those and you go, well, they're half at where we're at. But I think your point was they're not providing city schools, which is costing 30% of that total number.
Neither provide trash pickup either.
They're not providing trash pickup.
Trash pickup
94
and
to 71. And so they're not even close to half right now.
yeah.
So should we expect to get, I mean, it seems like we would expect, based on the U.S. Census, when that occurs next year,
Right.
that we would expect to get another increase in our shared revenues.
Our share of revenue is based on our special census. So
Until the real census, though, right?
that wouldn't be out probably until
That takes some
2021.
time before that, I was told that takes time before those
Right.
figures kick, it's certified and then the numbers kick in.
We're well into 2021 before we hit the FY20 census won't be available for us until 2021, probably late into 2021.
But if their estimates were already at 136,000, so
We're 136 on the U.S. Census, but
Yeah,
our state
our-
shared revenue is based on our special census, which is done in a
2021, I'm just looking for the next 2 or 3 years, what are our revenue sources, what are our
right.
expense sources?
Yeah.
We should have more revenue coming in 2021, right?
And I think we'll, in 2021, probably 2022 before we'll see that, because it will be into the 2021 budget year before we'll get the 20 census numbers, and it won't be adjusted by the state until the 2022 budget.
I do think we also, need to be cognizant that everything that, we're told and everything we read says a lot of our growth is all based on real estate, and everything that we read says 2019 will continue to be strong, but 2020 and 21 expect some kind of slowdown. So
Those are the projections, yeah.
Is there anything being done right now that's calculating, and I mean, I would say every city that's listed here probably has an impact fee on new development. Is there anything that's in our budget that's currently looking at impact fees?
Not in our budget. No impact fees are, well, water and sewer in their budget, they do what are basically impact fees, capacity fees. So that's in that budget. But in our general fund budget, no, impact fees aren't registered.
Do you think that's a good practice for every community around us to charge an impact fee but us?
Well, we're studying it, and we'll bring back the data and take a look at it.
But the revenue generated off that would be dramatically helpful
In certain
offsetting
specific,
some of these.
yeah, so in specific things. So roadways, you could do an impact fee for roadways, schools, parks. Some cities have done a public safety or police impact fee. So there's various impact fees you could do. You're limited on what you can do with that money. That money's then designated for that specific use.
Right.
Do you happen to?
But one of the things about impact fees, since it's not in place now, is making a decision for, the financial landscape that we're dealing with now. And then what could happen with impact fees is the acceleration of some of our CIP work.
Mm-hmm.
We could move some of those projects a little closer if we have another stream of income because of that. So I'd almost think that not considering a property tax increase in lieu of an impact fee, I think it's going to make a difference. But it's
not going to offset it. There's no question. But I'm just saying it'll help the cause, and it pulls those tier 3 projects down as far as Cherry Lane and Northfield and some of the development projects that we're looking at that are just currently unfunded.
That's right.
Or the budget's been pushed out to 22 where it's, it becomes kind of unrealistic to say that we're going to fund all those projects because there's just no revenue there to do it.
I think we also have to be realistic on the impact fee side, and you can't rely on your budgeting on the impact fee.
Right. Right. It's like sales tax.
Yeah, just because
economy, it's driven by that.
Where's I don't see Mr. Holtz, but how many building permits do we have this year? Is Mr. Holtz over there? How many building permits do we pull this year? Was it 7? I got the information right here.
Okay. While he's looking at that, as a practical matter, I would tell you that by the time we get through impact fees, take a look at it. We will probably be bumping up against our consideration of what we're going to do in equalization for FY23.
Yeah.
So it will dovetail into that, and we can certainly make an adjustment on there if development impact fees goes into the budget on what we do after equalization.
45 cents and 40.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I mean, that's.
How many, Mr. Holtz? Single family?
New single-family developments, we're up at 286 so far this calendar year.
How much for last year, though?
And that,
Okay. I thought we were set.
we ran below 200.
Yeah.
I think it's dropped.
March was really good.
I thought we were we pulled 700. I mean, I thought there was about 700 permits pulled last year. That, if I remember, that was.
Well, you're talking apartments and.
Yeah, everything. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would be more trying to find a way that we look at. I don't even want to get into the impact fee discussion. That gets into a rabbit hole that talk about. We really are talking about the other revenues. So.
There's quite a bit of analysis that's legally required for us to do impact fees, and we'll undertake those. It's a complex calculation. And it does have drawbacks. I mean, it's positive revenue, but there are drawbacks to it. So we'll take a look at it again. Realistically, we'll probably be looking at it, considering it, as well as considering what we'll need to do in FY '23, because '24 will be a year that we'll do equalization. So as a practical matter, I think we'll be close to that, and we would be able to adjust a property tax fee to incorporate that fee into it. In other words, we're way too early to really figure this thing out. on
My
impact.
quick thoughts, if you look at, I think you've got 45 cents plugged in there, and that's
Right.
that's an additional, 16 million that would come in.
We'd be at additional 12, or no, additional 20.
Okay. I would much rather, we've implemented a solid waste fee this year that's going to bring in, that started in January, and that's just say 40,000 households at $5. That's 2.25 million I think we're bringing in this year. Does that sound right?
2.1 is what we have budgeted, yeah.
So, instead of ramping that up to 45 cents, I would much rather see us, it's no fun to talk about a tax increase every year. So, I would rather see us be at 35 or 37 and a half. And it just rough numbers, at 35, we're looking at 13 million, 12 or 13 million, or whatever we need to get to balance our budget. That's where I think we get to balance in the budget, and then look at the reassessment coming up. And if we fund everything and that's 14 or 16 million dollars, then what is it that we get to balance that and keep us? That's already going to be a bonus for us not to have to take out a fund balance, because we have pretty much budgeted fund balance.
How much do we have in our fund? How much do we estimate we're going to have in fund balance at the end of this tax year, fiscal year?
47.5.
That's what we expect to have after the spend down this year.
Based on our projections now, yeah.
I do think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, but with the 45 cents, we were putting 4 million back into fund balance?
Yeah, we're raising our fund balance up closer to the top end of our range that our policy would require. And I set the number at 35.8. That pretty much balances us. We show only a small $100,000 decrease. We can easily make that up during the year, but 35.8, or I'm sorry, 0.358 puts us, but we are dancing right to the bottom of the policy
So
for the next couple of years based on projections.
35 cent, you just don't pay back to you just don't repay your fund balance.
Yeah, we keep our fund balance towards that. The blue shaded would represent what our fund balance is now. So we would be at the bottom of our policy goal at about 25%. 25% of revenue.
And I think what the total number always falls back on, well, how much is this going to affect me each month? Well, right now we've already hit them with $5, and with that change, you're looking at $15.20 or 183. Is that the annual amount?
Right.
So if I think that's got it down to the point that we've got the budget close to balanced. As far as we're not eating into our fund, we're paying for the services we're providing, and theoretically in a couple years we should have enough debt roll off that maybe this situation will right itself somewhat. I think you're really close with where you're at there to having a budget that would operate us for at least the next year, maybe two. We know things will go up again next year. I think you're getting close with that number. What I really don't want to see is, every year people come up to me and they say, "You've increased my taxes again." And I try to explain to them, your property appraisal went up, we adjusted the rate, and it's supposed to be revenue neutral. I always lose that argument, no matter how I try to present it to them, because they know that they're paying more, and it's generally because of something that's taking place on the county or something they've done to increase the value of their property. But in 20 years, we can hang our hat on the fact that we haven't had a tax increase. Probably not the best thing that was ever done was to brag about not increasing property taxes for 20 years. The situation that we worked into was created by not increasing property taxes for 20 years.
Right.
So now it's the responsibility of us to figure out how to fix the problem that has been created over the last 20 years, and some of us can take 5 or 6 years credit for that, and some of us a little more, and some of us a little less. But I think you're close to the solution there to get us back to being somewhat neutral. Ideally, I would like for us to start paying our debt down, and I'm not sure that this is going to accomplish paying the debt down any, but
Are there, I'm gonna segue you real quick, but I mean, are there any changes that if we were to raise property taxes, are there any changes that you would suggest or could give us as options that would basically be behavioral based as it relates to the way the city has done business in the past and will do business in the future? I mean, look, the big worry for me on having a big number in front of this is we hit this big number and all of a sudden we go, we're good. Now we got the capacity to borrow more money and spend more money. We're good. We raise the taxes. We can do everything we ever want to do. Tier 10. Let's pull it in, baby. We got it. When it really isn't something that we necessarily have to provide. I mean, look, I got to tell you, stuff I view this, maybe it's oversimplified, but, I'd love to buy my kids every toy in the store and have the badass car when they're 16 and all that stuff. But it just doesn't work that way because I don't have the money to do it. And so it ain't because we don't love somebody if we don't provide every little service that everybody thinks they want or need in this world. So, I mean, we can go through this thing and we can just try to get it up to budget neutral or whatever, or we can try to buy ourselves 2 or 3 years worth of cushion because we don't want to deal with it next year. And I believe, there have been some mistakes in the way we do it in the past. What I'm wondering is what's going to keep us from doing it in the future if we just ramp this thing up and start cranking up spending again. I mean,
one of the things, let me speak to one thing that I think maybe is healthy to take as credit our past. Last year, we asked our departments to really tighten their belt and cut 10%, and I think they were looking at processes and efficiencies and that kind of thing, and that was a healthy thing for us to do. And
I know we've done some of that. Look, I'm not saying everybody isn't trying, and I appreciate that. All I'm trying to say is my fear is not really for our current staff members, my fear is thinking 3 or 4 or 5 years down the road, different people in these seats, and what does that, look, and really the only reason I'm thinking about that is when I came to this council, I mean, dang, I've been here 5 years, and really, man, I'm having epiphanies left and right about how all the budget stuff works. 5 years into this deal, much less the first year I was in it, when we didn't get information that was this good. And so, I'm just trying to figure out what are things that we can combine with this to perhaps, like, i.e. changing some financial ratios that might make sense for where we are today. I mean, that's what scares me about it, and I'm just curious if you have some options on that or some suggestions. I'd be more comfortable. I mean, I got to tell you guys, I'm probably not good for 35, just me personally, which obviously means I'm not good for 45 because I can come up with over the next few years a pretty substantial amount of increased revenues over the next 3 years, a pretty substantial increase in revenues other than a property tax increase, and with a slowing economy. And I can come up with $3 or $4 million of costs that I think we can probably get away with starting this year, which means the number comes on down to more like 20 or 25 cents. And then, if we're healthy about our borrowing, does the $78 million that's on our CIP for next year, is that incorporated in this projection?
It's not 78, it's 20.
23.
Next year, the 21.
21, no, that's not,
Our CIP.
yes, well, no, that's not reflected in there. Our 5-year CIP on the assumptions would be in 2021, 30 million.
So on our CIP right here, in our booklet, we got
Yeah,
$78 million of borrowing
Right.
for next year.
Yeah, that's a 5-year CIP projection, as I said before. We haven't vetted through that year, we haven't looked at projects, we haven't moved them around and made recommendations on that. So what you have reflected in the pro forma for 2021 is about only $30 million worth of
All right,
borrowing.
here's
So we haven't gone
kind
through
of my
that.
point. We got $30 million. If we only borrow $22 million this budget year that we're talking about right now, 20, and we only borrow $30 million in the 21 budget year, then these numbers all are right.
Well,
If we borrow what's on our CIP for 2021, that's $78 million next year, right? Sorry.
we can do, well, let's go back to answer your original questions. There's something that we should do every year, and that's to look at our expenses very carefully every year. And I think that having been in the organization now for a little more than 3 years, I think that I can see that we run very lean in a lot of different areas.
I
think
agree.
we have, and I think the example or what is representative of that, as Councilmember Shacklett said, is the 10% cut really stressed some department on their service deliveries by a substantial amount. So substantial, I don't think we can continue to provide some of the service levels that we are providing unless we have some of the supplements that we've asked for. So, but that said, we should look at expenses every year. We should consider not just the supplementals we ask for, but a percentage of our budget every year. And we as staff, I'll commit to you that I'll do that every year. That's important to do. So keeping control on our expenses is extremely important, but we have to always balance that with our requirements and what we need to do, what we have to do by law, what we're committed to doing, and what council desires us to do. So with those 3 buckets, if we don't fill those up with revenue, we end up getting into our fund balance to balance it. And the equation is revenues, expenses, and that's it. You don't have any other choices. Debt does factor into expenses, but I will tell you, in accordance with our policies, which are very prudent, in accordance with the bond underwriting policies and our debt ratio, our Moody's ratios and the bond ratings and things like that, all those things are very important. So our ratios are in line. Debt is not our issue. Debt hasn't been our issue. Debt in the future isn't our issue, and more debt. Even along the lines of what we talked about, and I'm happy to show you charts of that, doesn't represent a problem to us going forward in the future. That's really not our issue, so long as we are structurally set up to be able to create the revenues to be able to pay for it. So our only limitation is, do we have the revenues to pay for our debt service? But as far as the level of debt and where we're at, that doesn't represent any policy according to our financial policies, which again are on the prudent side of what financial policies are for other cities. So I think we're strong in those areas. We don't want to take on any more debt than we have to, obviously, but
I mean, I got another idea. Like, how about we build our planning and zoning model in a model that does actually kind of pay for itself, instead of having a model that might not pay for itself or pays for itself in a better way, or that we plan for that it happens closer at least. I mean, I really don't have a problem with the idea of this. I mean, the fact that somebody who moved here 21 years ago paid $700 an average, for an average house, and the person that moved in last week to the same average house is paying $700 21 years later is just absolutely crazy to me that that's the way that this deal works. And I don't believe it's right. I mean, because the cost for the police officers and the roads and the schools and all that stuff is substantially higher. I get all that. So I'm not completely, anti doing anything at all. I just don't, I'm anti putting a cushion in because we don't want to talk about it, or because us not wanting to talk about the revenues and expenses might lead to other people not wanting to talk about revenues and expenses. And I think we should be talking about revenues and expenses and making sure we're handling it every year. I mean, I don't want to raise taxes every year either. But.
No, and last year we were in a transition, and I think department heads were told, cut your budget by 10%, and everybody sat out there last year going, okay, how are we going to cut our budgets by 10%? The year before we cut, I think it was 4 or 5% the year before. And part of the reason that we're talking about this right now is our population hasn't decreased in the last two years. So, the services and the households that we're providing services to, and inflation and cost, they haven't decreased in the last 2 years. But then we said, hey, cut your budgets. And it's, you don't maintain your house for 2 or 3 years, and then all of a sudden, y'all have heard me preach this before, Barfield we built in 1997, and we used the absolute heck out of it. And then Sportscom, even 5 years ago, we used it, and then we set up here going, golly, we got to spend $2.8 million to get it back into function, but we hadn't spent anything on it for 20 years. Right. And then we sit and wonder why it costs so much to do that. So, I'm not advocating we have a lesser or higher, but, the part I think we've got to get, we build roads, we build schools, we build fire stations, we pick up trash, we provide police services, and we have parks. A lot of our internal services, HR, those things, we have to have those for an organization with 1,000 people. But if you told me that we could, no one's going to want to talk about a tax increase, whether this is a political thing to say or not. No one's going to want to talk about a tax increase next year during an election cycle. I mean, we couldn't even talk about the gas tax 2 years ago because it was an election cycle. So, I would rather us come up with what's a sustainable model that we can provide the services that if we figure our population growth is going to be 3 to 4% per year, then we need to come up with a model that will sustain that growth instead of doing the exact opposite and saying, I hope sales tax will cover us. At the same time, instead of us worrying about, a $78 million borrowing issuance, I don't think anyone up here will disagree that Cherry Lane needs to be built. You cannot drive down Broad Street and down Thompson Lane right now because they are at capacity. And anyone coming from Highway 96 trying to drive Haynes Drive or Thompson Lane or Compton, you can't do that because they're at capacity. So if we can show the taxpayer that, we're not just giving raises or, that I think we have to do that to provide a competitive workforce. And that even goes back to 10 years ago when we changed our benefit structure. I mean, we didn't have turnover 10 years ago. Now we have turnover, and we have to be much more competitive with the private sector. But if we can show the taxpayer that we're giving good use of their dollars, and that means building roads, building schools, building fire stations in their community, I'm okay with it. Now, if we're sitting up here and we're going to argue, or not argue, but we're going to talk about, I want to give this charitable organization more money, I want to do, then I'm going to have a problem with that because I think that's not where the taxpayer is saying, I see a road being built. I see I see Blackman Road, the new bridge being built on Blackman Road. People are okay with that. And that's where I fall on it. So what I would say, because we're bumping up against our next meeting, Craig, why don't you do this? Why don't you come up with 3 or 4 options that give us, here's the different increases that we could, here's a 25%, here's a 35%, or 25 cent, 35 cent, 40, and go on up. I think we've all seen the different models. Okay. But then what that does to our fund balance. And I agree with everything you're saying. The thing we need to be careful with is budgeting on what revenues could come in the next couple of years, because who knows what happens in the next couple of years. I mean, we're at 43% sales tax right now. We're at 39% property tax. Well, what happens if that sales tax number goes down to 39% next year? and we don't have that balance. So is that cool with everybody to do that?
Mayor, can I add one thing?
Sure.
One thing, too, the one-time revenue streams and the impact on the net on that, I'd really like to see us get away from rolling that into the overall operating budget and pulling that number out, which, of course, is going to increase the number. But I'm sure there's a reason we do it that way, but I would much rather, if we have those one-time gains, that stuff roll immediately to the reserve fund rather than being a part of operating. So I think, there's all kinds of good commentary that we've had, but dealing with the real number, the worst-case scenario, I think is much better than being optimistic and then us being in this situation again.
And one last thing I want to leave on, and this is, the $700 house that Rick's talking about. I am all for finding a way that we get growth to pay for itself. My guess is that there will be councils here in 20 years, if we still are growing the way that we're supposed to, that'll be having the same discussion, because there's not any way that growth's ever going to pay for itself. But putting that on the back of just new construction won't work, because the same person that's coming in and buying someone's existing house, they're not paying those fees. And we've got to find, a real estate transfer tax is the best way to go about. That'll never pass. But we got to find some way to be able to make it equitable. And hopefully that's what this study will come back to show us.
Well, in the end, if that $700 house, they're still paying $700, that's every year. You get a present value of that number for they live in that house for 20 years. They got to pay an awful big number up front that's never going to be doable to make that cover the difference in what the property tax change, the rate, the equalization has come down to.
I don't know if it's still on the table or not, and I'm just throwing this out. I don't really want to answer, but selling Murfreesboro Electric. Don't know. Don't look at me like y'all gonna shoot me. I just asked the question. Mr. Tyndall, I just want to say to you and your staff, you did a fabulous job.
Thank you.
And since I've been on this council, I've never had a budget presented as transparent as this budget has been. So I just want to thank you and your staff. Fabulous.
Great
Amen.
credit to
Second.
Aaron and Amanda and Melissa for putting together, and all the department heads for really
And I
doing a
guess
lot of yeoman work to get it all together.
one thing I hope that the public understands is really two things haven't gone up in the last 20 years. It's property taxes in the city of Murfreesboro, and I guess what we make up here.
Hey, speaking of that.
And I don't want to say you get what you pay for, but
But I just did.
but at the same time, Murfreesboro's a great city. It's a wonderful place to live. We're not talking about that significant a change with what we've got presented. It's when we look at the numbers, any increase is probably going to be frowned upon. I don't think there's any question about that. But the reality is, there has to be the understanding that never increasing a tax rate is not a good idea if you want to continue to provide services. And I went to Capital Connections the other day, and I sat and I listened to all of our state representatives and our senators. And they talked about opioid problems. They talked about fatherless home problems. They talked about vouchers. They talked about everything except what people talk to me about when I run into them at Hardee's. And that is, what are you going to do about traffic? And the mayor hit the nail on the head. We have to improve transportation, and the only way that we're going to improve transportation in Murfreesboro is we have to fund it.
All right, with that, I do want to say thank you all for what you've done. I think this is much more productive for us to be talking about big picture items like this as opposed to looking at how much y'all are spending on office supplies. I mean, that's Craig's job and Aaron's job, and but this is much better as opposed to going through a budget hearing where each department head gets up and we talk about those. I still think we need to do that. We need to hear from our department heads about what your goals are coming up in the next the next year, but this is much more productive. Marcus is going to need 5 minutes to get us turned over, so let's just figure that we're going to get started at 7:10. We'll start back with our city council meeting. We'll stand adjourned.